As I mentioned, the department has promulgated standards around social studies that prior to last year really hadn't existed. They've revised that in terms of civics and in terms of history curriculum going forward. Part of it, as I mentioned, was a result of a suit filed by a number of students concerning a lack of civics education in Rhode Island. It was a federal suit, and while they were denied at the first Court of Appeals level, they agreed to a settlement with the state around civics and around social studies. So that's one of the drivers of this particular exercise. So we've got a team from Rhode here. They've taken their Saturday out to spend with us. Lisa Odom-Villella is the Deputy Commissioner for Instruction in Rhode Island. She was the former Assistant Superintendent in Pontiac. She has a vast experience in elementary and secondary education. She's here to introduce her team and the people that are going to take us through the social studies standards. This is interesting. I've seen the presentation at the Council on Elementary and Secondary Education, and it's kind of interesting to take a look at what has been a controversial project in other states. So without further ado, I'll let you introduce the presenters.
Great. Well, thank you. As Tim mentioned, my name is Lisa Odom-Villella. I am the Deputy Commissioner for Instructional Programs. Actually, I've got two teams that'll be here today. So I've got my teaching and learning team, and then you'll hear from Mario Carena to learn about the school building authority projects. So he'll be presenting after lunch. So I'll be here through both of those today if there's any questions that come up during lunchtime. I've spent about 20 years of my education experience here in Rhode Island, so it's a pleasure to be with you all. So thank you for taking time out of your Saturday. So I'm actually going to, I'll introduce the team. Lisa and I will be here as well to answer any questions, but so Lisa Furr is my Chief of Teaching and Learning, and she's been with Rhode for multiple years, and has, I won't say the number, she is, has a wealth of knowledge around the process of creating and adopting new standards, as well as Phyllis Lynch. She is the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and she is going to be presenting along with her Associate Director, Nicole Lyons. So they will take us through the PowerPoint and then pause along the way for questions, or certainly questions at the end. So we hope that this is, a dialogue, that we can have a respectful and fruitful conversation about the standards. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Phyllis and Nicole.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for, don't stand in front of the projector, rule number 1. Thank you all so much for inviting us here this morning to hear about the social studies standards. Just a few things before we get started. The first one is, I know that many of you have questions even before we start this presentation. And so, so the presentation can flow smoothly, we will stop every few slides to give you an opportunity to ask clarifying questions along the way. And then when the entire presentation is done, we'll obviously have more time for questions. If you have a question on a specific slide and you, for some reason, don't get to ask it, or you just feel you don't want to ask the question out loud, please write it on the index card that you have at your table, and when we open it up to full Q&A, we'll come around and collect those cards so your question can be honored, okay? So now I'm going to talk about the Rhode Island Social Studies Standards. So first, before we even start with the fall of 2020, in 2019, there was some regulation requiring high-quality standards for all of our subjects: English, math, science, social studies, arts, world language. And so that's what kind of spawned this process. In the fall of 2019, there was the formation of the RISAC, the advisory group, which has teachers and representation from different historical organizations across the state. This group was put together to help us navigate this process and to make the process collaborative. And they have been a committee that continues to be part of our framework process as well. During the first meetings, the RISAC committee reviewed the GSEs, which are the old social studies grade span expectations, GSE. We use a lot of acronyms in education, so if there's one you don't understand, I'll try to clarify all of them for you. So those are the grade span expectations. And so in 2020, so that brings us to 2020 in the fall, we formed RISAC, and then there was extensive community outreach and input. And what RISAC did is they also went through the GSEs, and they decided that, hey, you know, we need some standards here, and we need to think about how we're going to go about this process. So in 2020, we did some community outreach. There was some input, and then in 21-22, there was drafting of the anchor standards with educators. And that process was done alongside a R2CC and West Ed, and they worked with us in a consulting capacity to get those anchor standards developed. In the summer of 22 and into the fall, it was when we were ready to draft the standards. And so with that, we also hired an individual at Rhode who is the Humanities and Social Studies education specialist. So they're our social studies expert, and that person has drafted the standards and has used RISAC again as that collaborative partner in doing so. In the fall/winter of 2022, November and December, there was some stakeholder meetings, there was some public feedback given on the standards and the process. And into 22, December into January, there were revisions based on their feedback. So one thing to note is throughout this process, it's been collaborative. We've been getting feedback from RISAC and from R2CC and West Ed, and with everyone's input, we've been able to then get to our standards in presenting them to council for endorsement. So that's the overall timeline and process that we've used. Thanks, Lisa. So here are the revision goals that the team had. So the first was to ensure our students, by the way, I'm going to go top left to right and then bottom left to right. We wanted to make sure that there was alignment from K to 12. And the team noticed that, you know, there wasn't that originally there wasn't that alignment, and so our new standards, it was a goal when creating them to make sure that they had alignment from K to 12. So we're not looking at it just based on a grade level in a subject in isolation, we're looking at it aligning K to 12. The second is the red box. The second goal is to connect social studies education to current events that affect students' lives. And so through a public engagement survey, many respondents noted that there was a need for current events that are happening in our world to be included within our social studies curriculum, and social studies standards, especially those that are relevant to students in our real life, right? And that's how we build connections with students in our classrooms, essentially. So that's why that one's really important to keep in mind. The third was to prepare our students to be informed and engaged citizens. And we wanted to make sure that civics touched all of the standards K through 12 and was embedded throughout. The fourth is this darker box here on the bottom left. And we wanted to include representation of historically marginalized voices within our curriculum. And so current and former students who responded to a survey, they noted that they rarely saw their own identities and communities represented. And for students, if any teachers are out there, we know how important this is for them to really connect and have a sense of belonging to not just their school and not just their class, but to the curriculum and the teaching and learning that's happening. The middle box, the blue box, another goal was to emphasize inquiry-based, inquiry-based learning. And we wanted to make sure that there were different perspectives being brought into a curriculum to make sure students could see various perspectives in order to to inform their own perspective. And finally, we wanted to support the LEAs and teachers in implementing content required by legislation. So this means that according to legislation, there's some specific content that is required, and that is content such as African American history, and Asian American, and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander history, genocide, human rights, and Holocaust and genocide education that need to be embedded within the standards. So these were the revision goals that have led us to, again, designing the standards. Thanks, Lisa. So while that was all really helpful, we also had to do the research, right? So this is the research approach that we took to then write the standards. So first, we looked at other states. What did they have? What are they doing? And to look to see if there were some common themes and best practices. We reviewed states like Alabama, California, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Kentucky. I'm not going to name them all. Tennessee, New York. And we wanted to look at our New England neighbors and other neighbors who were just outside of New England, just because we wanted to see what was going on and what they were doing. The second is that we reviewed national standards. And so we reviewed the national standards, which are the National Council of Social Studies, and these provide some general principles around what social studies standards should have. And we also used a C3 framework, and that is the College, Career, and Civic Life framework. And that was to make sure that it guided the way for the structure of our standards and inquiry topics. Because we all know how important college and career readiness is, and we also know how important it is for our students to have a comprehensive civic education. The third is we reviewed a scan of our state grade progressions and trends. And this was a study prepared by CCSSO. Get ready for this one. It's the Chief Council of State School Officers. Thank you. It's a big one. It was a report prepared by this consortium, this group in which we belong to. And they basically what they did is they visited curriculum developers and they kind of scanned the core curriculum for some options. And this helped us when it came to subject matter alignment. So it's not just grade alignment and what students in each grade are able to do and what's appropriate for that grade, but also what subjects are appropriate for that grade level as well. Fourth is that we scanned available curriculum that was available to see what topics were out there and how they were being presented. And finally, we looked at the current grade progressions in RI in Rhode Island LEAs. One thing that we did find when we scanned the Rhode Island LEAs is that there were some schools in our state that had an elementary social studies curriculum and some that didn't. We also realized that there were very different topics and very different items and types of instruction happening across our state. And so that told us that, there was a definite need for standards there. This research, and we gathered the appropriate alignment, and it helped us identify the topics that were appropriate for grade levels. We also had to take into consideration the content required by legislation and how to make sure that all this content was honored throughout the standards. So the one thing I'd like to note here is that Holocaust and genocide education, this instruction is included in middle and high school, while the others are specific to elementary and secondary. Thanks, Lisa. So now we're going to get a little bit into how the standards are designed. So there are anchor standards plus content standards that equal our Rhode Island social studies standards. What does that all mean? So there are 4 anchor standards. There's a little math involved here. So there are 4 anchor standards. I'm sorry, hold on. There are 4 domains within the anchor standards. And those domains are civics and government, history, geography, and economics. And that makes up the 4 domains. Within those domains, there are 3 principles, and that equals 12 anchor standards. And those anchor standards inform each content standards, and the content standards are your grade level standards, and that gives you the Rhode Island social studies standards. Now the standards are designed, there's a 4-part hierarchy of rigor. And what that means is within the standard, it says explicitly what students should be able to do. And that you'll see verbs like identify, explain, analyze, and argue. So here are some of the anchor standards. I'm sorry, not some of the anchor standards. Here's why we have anchor standards. So the anchor standards, basically just a little bit more in detail. The document states what students should know and be able to do, and that's crucial to any standard. That's what creates a standard. And their goals and objectives in terms of student outcomes, there's fewer, higher, and clearer anchor standards, and they incorporate community feedback regarding clarity and skill coverage. And so while you're probably thinking, wow, there's 4 anchor standards, or there's 4 domains, there's 12 anchor standards, K through 12, that seems like very few. That's because the aim of this was to get students to go deeper, right? Depth over breadth, right? So get deeper into topics rather than just kind of talk about all different topics and have a breadth of knowledge. We want them to have deep knowledge and understanding. And then the content standards, they contain principles and topics aligned to the content standards, because remember, the anchor standards inform the content standards. They are grade level and course specific, and they incorporate community feedback regarding specific content. And that's where that RISAC group came into the mix in our timeline. They really helped inform that. So here are the 4 domains, and here are the 3 principles under each domain. So you have your civics and government, history, geography, and economics. And this is how all of the content standards are formed from the anchor standards. Just kind of giving everyone a minute to look at this slide, maybe digest it for a second. And also, the one thing I'd like to know is if you do go to our RIDE website, into our social studies section, you can click on each grade level and really look at the standards. This chart is there as well. So it is public on our website. So let's talk a little bit about the K-8 grade progressions for the content standards. And one thing I'd like you to notice is how the content standards align. And so I had mentioned in the beginning that we didn't want the approach of, in this grade, we will teach this, and there will be no connection to the next grade or maybe what came prior to. Alignment plays a large role in the standards from K to 12. And so you'll notice that there's a build-up on the topics and a build-up on the standards. So for example, in kindergarten, it's living and working together in schools, family, and neighborhoods. And then it builds to local communities and global communities, and then the broader United States. So there's a progression here that an alignment that is crucial for students. So again, this is K through 8. You'll notice that grade 8 is government and civic life in the United States, so that's where civics lives in grade 8. But remember that throughout all of our standards, one of those anchor standards is civics and government. So in every grade, students are touching those anchor standards. So I don't want you to look at this and say, oh, students are only getting civics in grade 8. No, they're getting it throughout. Grade 8 is just a civics specific where they'll go a little bit deeper. So again, K through 8, we'll move on to what high school looks like. Now you'll notice that there are 5 high school courses here, civics being one of them. So students, when they graduate according to our secondary regulations, need 3 credits of social studies to graduate. And rather than pigeonhole districts to say everyone has to do these same courses, because we all know that every school here has a plethora, a variety of social studies courses they offer. And we also know that high school scheduling for different students well, if any of you are high school teachers, you know. High school scheduling, we didn't want to pigeonhole schools in any way and put up any more barriers. So we decided that we would offer 5 content standards, and schools could choose which 3 that students take. Some schools may say, you know, we require students to already take civics. Well, civics will just be one of the 3, right? And so that is why there's 5 versus just the 3, okay? So after today, maybe not even this weekend, because after today, I'm sure you'll just not want to talk about education anymore. You'll wait till next week. When you go on our RIDE website, you'll be able to actually see what a standard table looks like. And so let me just point out a few things before I turn it over to Phyllis. The first is that the verbs that we talked about that identify, explain, and analyze, you'll see that in the learning assessment objectives where students demonstrate an ability to do these things within this standard. And then you'll notice that there's a little grid at the top in the longer box, and that grid is where the standard itself links to the anchor standards, which are those four boxes we saw earlier. So this is an example of a standards table, and it looks like this. It's uniform throughout each grade. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis.
Hi everyone, I'm Phyllis Lynch, just a reminder. It's nice to be here today with all of you. As I was sitting over there, I was struck by, I think the last time I was invited to be with all of you was actually doing a standards presentation. I'm going to date myself, and maybe some of you were here, on the Common Core standards when we adopted them. So that was 2010. So it's been quite a while, so I'm glad to be here. So I think what's unique about the way we've put out these standards this year was we took the next step. So normally when we've released standards, and some of you may know if you've been in education for a while, is we put out that standard. So you can see the standard is that, culture and diversity in the community, analyze the culture and diversity in local communities. And that's what we put out. But we took it a step further with these standards to do a little bit more of the work that often teachers have to do on their own and unpack them. And really talk about, as you're thinking about and looking at curriculum and determining instruction, what are the guiding questions that you want to ask about that standard? And what are the learning objectives that you want to get to for students? So we did a little bit of that unpacking to support teachers as they start to think about instruction and looking at curriculum materials. So we can go on. So this was an example from first grade, by the way. So I'm going to spend a little time talking a little bit deeper about the engagement process that we went through to adopt these standards. Nicole earlier talked about the longer timeline, and I have to tell you, so as you listen to that presentation, think about that. That was 2019 and 2020. Pre-pandemic is when we started the process for these standards. So we have had a very long engagement process. Part of that obviously was a little bit wonky, right, because the pandemic happened in there. But we worked through it, and we made it to here today, so we're very excited about that. So once the standards were drafted, so this is where this kind of part of the presentation starts, is we did many stakeholder sessions, and we did those in two ways. One was to hold sessions specifically for that and designed for that. So we did 3 in-person sessions across the state, as well as 1 virtual session online. But then we also reached out to many community organizations and went to them. So if they had a regular meeting scheduled, we went to them and we got input there as well and spoke with them. So we tried to capitalize on organizations' already meeting times to be able to engage them in these conversations. So you can see, obviously the RISE Act was involved along the way. We were able to work with classroom educators, the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition, the Holocaust Genocide Education Commission, the Civics Task Force that we had, the Commissioner Student Advisory Group. You can see the whole list there, the general public through those sessions. So we were able to engage about 170 participants in all of those sessions. We also the public would just send an email. So some of those organizations would gather feedback and send a letter or an email altogether. So you can see that most of the feedback, and I guess that makes sense, were from educators because they are the ones that are going to be implementing the standards. So they were the majority of the feedback. But we did have some parents and caregivers, even one student responded, some institutions of higher ed, school and district leaders, as well as some community members responding to the surveys and providing input. So here was some of the feedback that we received that were strengths. So they thought the standards were well structured and organized, well thought out. They thought they had a clear focus on inquiry as a driver for student learning in social studies. And that was very important to both, that came out of the early input that we had done prior to starting to write, as well as for the educators that really wanted kids not just to learn facts, but to think, right? To really investigate and understand. So that was an important piece for it. That they liked the set of anchor standards that repeat year to year, so supporting that depth over breadth. They thought the range of content was comprehensive. They valued the inclusion of diverse peoples and communities, which was also something that came out very strong in the early surveys and early input that we got prior to writing the standards. They thought it was helpful for the organization and the content tables. They were user-friendly, and that they appreciated discrete social studies standards at the elementary level. So those were the positives. And so there were also some areas that folks had some suggestions. One was that in the early drafts, US history was heavy and it did not include enough world geography in middle school. So if you think back to that table that we showed earlier, the middle school, in addition to having 8th grade civics, the 6th and 7th had world history and world geography in it, which is a shift from the first draft where they were more heavily US based. And when we looked at the feedback, looked at what other states did, what nationally was happening, and also looked at the K-12 progression and what was happening in our high schools, in particular, where many of our high schools, as we looked in the majority of our high school students, were taking US History 1 and 2 in high school, we thought that we could make it more balanced and include more world geography in the middle school. So that was a shift that we made as we did the revisions based on feedback. Again, the stakeholders felt that civics should be emphasized at all grades. And they are. I think, as part of that feedback, people saw that 8th grade was physics, but often, sometimes, depending on how they looked at the standards, might not have noticed that it is embedded across all of the grade levels. So we did make sure that as you dive into the standards, you'll see civics as well as economics and geography and the historical pieces embedded in all of it. And then some of them, although some folks liked the table design, others thought it was too complex with too many standards. So we did do some revisions. We made some changes to the table to make them clearer, pulled out some of the wording. We actually reduced some of the standards and content per table as well, and went back through them to see if there are places where they were a little bit repetitive within grades or across grades, and removed some of them as well. so try to streamline them a bit. So those were revisions that were made in that draft period. Some others was that there was a lack of emphasis on recent years and current events. And I will say the challenge of history, right, and social studies standards is what happens. With every day, we have more history and social studies, right, content that continues to accrue, which is challenging. It is not like that in most other subjects, right? But for us, as time goes on, there's more to teach in that way. So it was hard. It was really hard trying to figure out where to fit everything in. And the piece that we did come to was that we did make some revisions to try and include more recent and modern history in the standards themselves. But part of what we're working on right now are frameworks that really support and guide instruction. And so in there, you will see, once they come out, they're still in the writing process, is that it does emphasize and talk about how to include and talk about current events in all of the grades and in all of the content and make those connections through instruction. Because what we don't want is a big event to happen, right, in history, and we're like, oh, well, that's not on the agenda for today, we can't talk about it, right? We want to help and engage and encourage teachers to make sure they're including those events. This also was a tough one. The stakeholder input was mixed on whether the standards should be grade span or grade specific. You know, as we looked across the districts originally, as Nicole mentioned, people were doing very different things in different grades. So the idea that we could say, all right, we do this and everyone's going to be happy. No matter what order they were going to be in, someone was not going to be happy. And that's just, you know, unfortunately, trying to gain some consistency for our students made it challenging. And so as educators, there's going to be some changes. Some, probably less in high school, I will say, but in elementary and middle, you will see some of those changes happening. But when we did some research, the majority of states are grade specific. And in fact, as more recent states have started to revise their standards, they have gone to grade specific. Part of that was ensuring that all of our kids, as you know, we have, especially in our most needy communities, there's a lot more transiency going from district to district. And what we don't want to happen is that kids are getting the same content and then not getting exposed to other content. So, which is why we went to and ended up supporting and bringing to the council grade level standards.
Do you only look at states that have pretty good public education systems? I mean, are you really like looking at Massachusetts is what I'm asking?
We certainly looked at Massachusetts.
And,
yep.
that one has grade specific.
Yep. We did the broad spectrum, but we also, a lot of the foundation of these were Massachusetts. In fact, when the RISAC first started looking, the two states that they looked at the most was Massachusetts and New York. Although we certainly looked across nationally as well. We can go on to the next slide. So then there were some things that were feedback, but weren't things that ended up in the standards because they just weren't things that belonged in the standards. So for example, there was a request for connections to our WIDA standards. Our WIDA standards are our English language development standards for our multilingual learners. And while they are not included in the standards themselves, that is part of our framework documents. So part of what we did in all of our frameworks documents is make those connections to our English language development standards. As we have a growing English language learner population in the state, we want to make sure that educators have some resources to support instruction for those students. Request for teacher time and training at the elementary levels. So we will do our part to try and do that. I think some of that is going to involve the schools and the communities and the school committees in helping to figure out when that training can happen, right? Questions about recommendations for high school. So while you saw that there were 5 courses that the standards were broken into, while they are not required, through the frameworks, we will be making a recommendation on which ones we think kids should take to really get that broader content of learning as they exit our school system. Now, that doesn't mean that kids can't focus on a particular area or go deeper if they're very interested in civics, to take that civics course at high school as well. But we are going to make some recommendations there. There was a concern that there's going to be a change for LEAs in schools. Yes. But we're going to talk a little bit about that timeline. So hopefully that will support the time to make these changes thoughtfully. Requests for high quality instructional materials and professional development. So part of the work that we are going to be engaging in addition to writing the frameworks, is to start to do some work and scan the curriculum materials that are out there. So pulling in some educators to help us review them for alignment and the things that are important to us as a state, to be able to share that information back with districts so then they can make decisions about which curriculum they want to use. But we're just trying to give them a little bit of resources and support to be able to make those decisions. Because we know that diving deep into those curriculum materials is time consuming. So rather than each district having to do all of that work themselves, we're going to pull together some educators and do some of those reviews and share that back with districts to aid in that work. Questions on how to integrate with ELA. That has come up as well. Many of the literacy curriculum that our districts are using, particularly in elementary and middle school, are knowledge-based curriculum. And so they might have themes that relate to particular science or social studies content. And so they're reading stories, and whether it's fiction or nonfiction, that might relate to social studies content. So what we are doing is starting to take a look at some of those literacy curriculum and where they align with our standards so they can see, well, oh, in our literacy curriculum, this actually is the same topic we're teaching in social studies. Won't that be a great opportunity for our English teacher and our social studies teacher to collaborate and do some cross-disciplinary learning with our kids? So we're doing some guidance related to that. Concerns of lack of standardized assessment. This is an interesting one because on the one hand, you had folks that said, well, we need an assessment because then, we'll teach it and everyone will be forced to teach it. And then there's others that go, I don't want an assessment. At this point, we don't plan on doing a statewide assessment in social studies, but it did come up. And what we will do, again, part of our frameworks document is providing some guidance on assessment practices and what that looks like. So that will be part of that document. And concerns of lack of certain curriculum materials. So grade 4 is Rhode Island history. I don't think we're going to find a textbook of Rhode Island history. But what we are going to do, so as part of the work that we're going to do, is in addition to reviewing curriculum materials, for the 4th grade, as an example, history, we will be pulling together resources to help districts kind of create that curriculum. So that is part of the work we'll do, is create a library of resources aligned to the standards themselves so districts can use that as they begin to teach the curriculum. And so many of these are going to be embedded in the frameworks and other guidance that we are working on. And so here's our timeline. So you can see on the years going down on the left side, and then there's what Rhode is going to be doing and what the expectation is for our LEAs. So this year, the 22-23 school year, we published the standards. We are going to be publishing the frameworks at the end of this school year. And we've been hosting some informational sessions and webinars. So those have started, and there's some more to come. Districts, hopefully, are starting to review the alignment of current grades and content with the new standards. Identifying grades that are going to have shifts, right? And starting to develop a timeline for aligning curriculum and instruction by fall 2026. So we've got some time in there. During the next school year, we're going to provide guidance on civics courses and the civics projects. So that is also part of the legislation that was passed, was that in addition to having the proficiency in civics requirement, there was a civics project. So we'll be providing some guidance on that. We will publish guidance on instructional material. So as I told you, those reviews to help districts pick out some and identify curriculum, we'll be publishing those next year. as well as guidance on supplemental resources. Because social studies is so vastly different even across states, and we have state history in probably every state, we need to also use a lot of supplemental materials in social studies. So we'll publish some materials there. So then from 24, 25, and through the next few years, we're going to continue to grow the list of resources and information on materials, support LEAs and implementation, continue to provide additional examples for civic projects and professional learning opportunities as districts continue to identify and purchase curriculum and begin implementation. To then be at full implementation in the 26-27 school year. So the reason for the long timeline is, one, we know there's going to be a shift in what folks are doing, but we also know that many of your schools have just adopted ELA and math curriculum, are still learning how to use those. In addition to the educator lift of those, frankly, there's the financial lift of both purchasing those materials and the professional learning to implement it. So we wanted to give a longer timeline for folks to be able to do this work. So it gives them several years, and based on their own timelines, like a district might say, you know what, our US history courses really aren't that different. We're gonna take those and do those first and get them out of the way, and we need a little bit more time to figure out our elementary and middle. So maybe those are the last ones they're going to do. Or a district may say, we wanna tackle those first. Those are going to be those local decisions as they look at their resources, look at what things are happening in their districts, right? If their elementary schools have a lot of things going on, they may push those off a couple of years and do those last, particularly as there's a lot of new curriculum happening at those grade levels as well. That is our last slide. So, yep, questions? Yep, and at least we'll come around if there's questions on cards.
Unlike ELA and math and the changes that were made to the curriculum that were unfunded, I can understand we were transitioning from one level of instructional material to something different. This is new. Who's going to be paying for all this instructional material in a 5-year span? And quite honestly, in a recession, while many of us have bonds out there to try to rebuild schools, while we just talked about school funding formula, and we're being put into another mandate to add something new to that, we just don't have the funds. The state doesn't have the funds, then how can we, the school committees, have the funds?
Just a note on that, one of the things that we'll push for is the standards to be incorporated into the basic education program. And the BEP serves as the basis. We can go to the legislature and basically say, if this is in the BEP and it's a regulation that we're mandated to implement, then they have to increase the funding accordingly. Now, having said that, that's the easy part. The hard part would be to convince the legislature. There are some members of the legislative leadership that hold on to every last dollar that's up there and aren't particular fans of education funding or municipal funding. So that's the task that we face in dealing with it. That's why we had the Senate here today to talk about incorporating new weights into the funding formula, where the House is going basically with categorical funding, which is always subject to annual review.
And I guess the only thing I will add to that too is what we will try to do. Funding is a challenging conversation. One of the things we were able to do with some of the literacy curriculum that districts were able to purchase is we were able to leverage some federal grants that we received. So many of your districts were able to purchase some of your curriculum materials with the use of some of those funding sources. So we will certainly continue to try and identify sources of funding and research grant opportunities to be able to leverage to support districts.
The only thing I was thinking to add is still, while there's not a lot of time left on some of the ESSER dollars, if there are ESSER dollars in a district that are not obligated or spent, because sometimes what we intend to spend doesn't end up being spent, to make sure that while you have that, to maximize that opportunity, if you still have that in your district, as something to look at. So just as a additional piece of looking at a variety of different funding sources, which is what we do as well at Rhode as we tackle some of these.
So is Rhode going to publish the analytics around the estimated costs for each of these things so that we can start our planning?
I don't have an estimated cost.
I do know that the legislature has directed Rhode to analyze the basic education program. That's why we're pushing for its incorporation. And whether or not districts are meeting the have the financial wherewithal to meet the requirements of the BEP. So that was a directive that occurred, I believe, a year and a half ago. Senator Pearson was the primary motivator for that, and Representative Amori, who's now the Secretary of State. So a lot of this, if you take a look at education, it's almost like a three-legged stool, and one of the legs is the basic education program, and the other standards and assessments. So standards set what we want kids to know and do. The BEP articulates that, and then the assessments reflect whether or not we're meeting those goals or not.
Thank you. I guess going back to the same questions is that when legislation is put in, and they're called unfunded mandates, right? And whether the schools can come forward and say that we just learned categorical is one time, so they need to allocate categorical for things like this. And we're trying to start composting. There's many things, and they're all good things, but particularly when you have to do new training and change things, I think that could be some feedback from us.
About 15 years ago, that required the state to fund mandates that it enacted. School districts and cities and towns went through an exercise of identifying all the mandates that state agencies and the legislature had imposed on them in the prior year. And in that period of time, they came up with a number of $4 million. So the Division of Municipal Finance signed off on it. They sent it over to the budget office in the Department of Administration. Budget office said, we're not paying it. So we've got it on the books, but it's not been enforced. So, part of the problem that we deal with, that I deal with, and Tim Ryan deals with from the Superintendent's Association, is every year we see well-intentioned bills being put in for mandates. The Right to Read Act was a well-intentioned bill, but when you took a look at the expenses associated with it, it was enormous. And it was meant to address students with dyslexia, which we should find a way to deal with dyslexic students. The problem was the training required was in the order of $30,000 per teacher. I mean, it was just enormous amounts of money that we would have had to expend. And it's well-intentioned. I think Senator DePalma talked about the legislation on the Ombudsman for Special Education. That would force the creation of an entire new state agency, staffed. So I don't think it's going to be enacted because the Speaker has a tendency to be very conservative with the state's dollars. But it's well-intentioned. The problem is, at the end of the day, who pays for it? And that's the same thing with mandates, whether they're department mandates or whether they're legislative mandates. I'm sorry, I'm taking up your time.
I have maybe 2 or 3 questions. The civics portion of your curriculum, did you ask in the surveys, did you describe civics to the respondents? Because I would imagine just in this room alone, you would get a diversity of opinion as to what civics meant. And so that would be one question. I didn't see anything with regard to media literacy, the ability, teaching students, the ability to discriminate between fact and fiction. It strikes me that that's an important, relevant item to have discussion about in classrooms. And then the third item that I saw it mentioned in the tables, diversity and inclusion. Maybe all of the schools, but certainly many of the schools in our state have a certain degree of racism and anti-Semitism, and I see where Holocaust and genocide are discussed, but in what context? Is it in the context that here are examples of the mistreatment of a certain segment of society? I'm just asking, are those items going to be taught in a manner that benefits, or at least attempts to alleviate racist tendencies, anti-Semitic tendencies? In the civics thing, I'm thinking of a populist running for president who doesn't have a chance in the world of getting a damn thing done if you understood how the Senate and the House work, and that if you don't have enough senators and congressmen to support you, this populist can win the vote, win election, never get a damn thing done. How did you learn that in civics? You know, those kinds of things.
So I'll kick us off. I imagine there may be multiple of us on the RIDE team who jump in on it. But part of what guided our definition of how civics is framed is the legislation that passed around civics. So our state does have, in that piece of legislation that requires civics education and a civics project, you know, it defines the attributes, if you will, and the areas of civics that must be included. And so that really was what we used to guide our work and to guide any input that we were seeking from people across the state about specifics, you know, when we started to get into specific content areas. So that absolutely was part of the framing around civics. To yours, I'm not gonna remember all three questions. Oh, the media literacy is in there. I don't remember which grade level though, off the top of my head, and I don't know if,
So it is in the standards, and it's peppered throughout. I can't remember specifically which grade levels, but there are, for example, like guiding questions around bias and using primary and secondary sources and reliable sources. So one thing I can just an ask is if and when you do go onto the on our website to look at the standards, you'll see them in peppered throughout all the standards. So that is part of our standards. So students can recognize and be able to identify what is a reliable source or not.
and I think to your last question around, you know, how populations may be represented within the standards, I would say a couple of things. One, specific to some of the populations you mentioned, we also already have legislation that guided some of that work to ensure not just that it was included, but making sure that representing oppressed communities, representing what happened to people along the way in different communities are part of what had to be embedded in our standards. So yes, that representation is in there. You also heard us talk about making sure through the standards work that we were including diverse perspectives, that we were including historically marginalized communities as part of, you know, all of our history and social studies education. So those, not just topics, but themes are also in there as students engage in an inquiry process around a lot of these content topics.
What the gentleman was saying over here, and go just a little bit further, okay? Because I do appreciate that we want to educate on our children on the history. However, I can't help thinking about these grassroots critical theory people who attack our schools when we are trying to teach the real history, okay? So I get concerned when we begin to implement their curriculums into our board docs, how it is going to make people feel that are totally against it. Is that gonna create an unrest in our communities? Is that gonna have these people attacking us, school board members in our schools, for doing what we should be doing by our students? To me, that's a big concern, because we had that going on before we even began to think about this new standard. So the standard may be good for our students. I'm not so sure about our communities.
I think one thing you could look at is in 2019, based on a report by the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council, the legislature and Ryan Pearson and Gregor Moray passed the Education Reform Act. And part of that got school committees out of the hiring business. We used to have the authority to give advice and consent to the hires of the superintendent. It was modeled after Massachusetts. They don't have hiring authority. In Massachusetts, curriculum is defined at the state level, so they have a common curriculum. One of the problems that we had when I first started was Providence didn't have a curriculum that even resembled the math standards in the state. That was NECAP. So what they did in 2019 is they also got school districts out of the curriculum development business. There are curriculum guidelines that are defined within the Department of Education. So if you get confronted and say, why did the school department adopt this curriculum? You didn't. That's not your responsibility any longer. That responsibility is a statewide level. And again, that mirrors what happened in Massachusetts. We've been playing catch up with Massachusetts for over 20 years now, and that's part of the process. Some of the things that they did was they had a uniform statewide curriculum. They got school committees out of the hiring business. They had a more robust and more integrated teacher evaluation process. They had at the time high stakes testing. You didn't pass the test, you didn't get a diploma. They've modified that now, but that's what the standards were. And Rhode Island tries to emulate that in legislation in 2019. So if it's a curriculum question, I don't want to impose this burden on Rhode, but really it's Rhode's responsibility to develop the curriculum at the behest of the legislature. They're the ones that said no more individual curriculums.
So certainly the standards speak to and talk about the need for including those types of content and conversations, but I think you're right. I think there are going to be people who are uncomfortable, and those questions will come to you. Those questions will come to us. It'll come to teachers. And I think where we all need to start to get is to be comfortable with and talk about how are we going to respond to those and how are we going to continue to have a universal message, right, that we're all standing behind. And there might be some challenges as we go along, but we need to continue to try and stay together and keep the message and keep the support of our teachers and our schools and our kids.
I'm going to put on my social studies teacher hat as a middle school social studies teacher. I'm very concerned about this and being attacked on the front line. Literally. I also have concerns about looking at materials that we're going to be using that haven't even been published yet. For instance, you're going to look at Rhode Island history. We don't have a Rhode Island history book. There isn't. So where are teachers getting these materials from? And what are we doing when parents come in and say, I don't want this taught?
Yeah, so as I had said earlier, part of what we're going to do is, because you're right, there is no book for Rhode Island history, but part of what we are going to do, but there are a lot of Rhode Island resources out there. And so what we are going to do at the state level is pull together those resources to develop I guess, a bank of resources for those fourth grade teachers in the Rhode Island history to be able to use to implement a curriculum. So just to answer that first part of your question.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts about the concerns with people really confronting you. We see that not only in social studies right now, honestly. We're seeing it in other content areas as well. And one of the things that we talk about at Rhode is, one, when we've been talking with superintendents, sometimes we said, as Tim just said, reminding people that the standards are set by the state. These are expectations that are set by the state for what all kids in Rhode Island are learning in X content area according to the standards. And that's not always helpful, but I think that's the starting place for the conversation to make sure that people clearly understand where those expectations are set. I think the other part of it that has been helpful sometimes, which we've been able to do with different groups of people, is to come together as an educational community and almost play out those scenarios. So I've actually been in meetings, usually with a superintendent, but with a superintendent that's experiencing some of this in their district and they're asking these questions. And we've sat down and said, okay, let's play this through. Like, let's actually workshop this in a way. What are the concerns that are coming forward? Let's look in the standards. You know, how might you respond? How might teachers respond? How do we get everybody talking about this and problem solving around it in a way that, from the superintendent to the school committee to the superintendent to teachers, you know, may feel like they have a response that's a shared response and not you out there on your own just trying to make it up or figure it out. When we've engaged in those, you know, at least the feedback that we've gotten is people have found them very helpful because it's, you know, it's doing that workshop sort of style, like problem solving. Okay, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to say? How do we figure it out? And whether it's this content or some of the other areas where you see this happening, I think that can be a really helpful approach. Also to make sure that whether it's with the state or just within your local community, that you have the support up and down the community, the educational part of the community, from the school committee to the teachers, and everyone has a shared, not just sense of support, but way that they feel like they can respond. And know that that's been discussed and people have tried to figure that out. And so I don't know if that's helpful. It's not an easy answer. I don't have an easy, you know, answer to some of that, but.
And then I worry, is my principal going to support me? Is my superintendent going to support me? Is the school committee going to support me?
And I think those are fair concerns, but for me, all of those come back to then also needing to have that conversation as a school community. So if I'm worrying about whether my principal is going to support me, one of the things I'm going to want to do as a teacher is say, like, okay, can we sit as a faculty or with my department and can we talk about this? Can we meet with the superintendent and talk about this? Can we, you know, meet with appropriate school committee members and have this conversation, because we're worried about it as teachers, from the teacher perspective in that case, and what do we say and what do we do and what's going to be considered appropriate and what's going to be then, you know, what's going to get me in trouble if I say it or do it. I would want to have that conversation, and I would be, you know, trying to make that happen if it's not already happening. And in some places, you know, it may be happening in a proactive kind of way. But
and I will add just really quickly that that concept of the state setting the curriculum is filtering down to the people that are going to school committee meetings and making a lot of noise about having the right to determine the curriculum, because they put in legislation repealing the 2019 Education Reform Act and returning curriculum to local school districts. That got a hearing. It didn't get out of committee. I don't think it's going to get out of committee anytime soon. So that is a strategy that's working. It's not your responsibility. I mean, people may not like to hear that, but that's the fact. The fact is the state determines what the curriculum frameworks are.
Can I just, I want to say thank you. So in my other life, many, many eons ago, I was a social studies teacher. That was I grew up in New York State, was educated in New York State, lived with a region system where everything was tested. If public education is key to sustaining a democracy, social studies, all of it, is key to educating a population who is ready to meet the challenges of the future. I sympathize, but if it wasn't social studies, it was health education. We've had the reading wars, we've had the math wars. And I think I am so grateful that Rhode finally had the resources and the incentive to look at social studies K-12 and to develop a coherent, reasonable, rational approach, not just to history, but to the other key elements. And I think there's great opportunity here at the district level to help our communities understand this so we don't have to get into the weeds around CRT or something else. It's about social studies. It's about our human history, our shared experience. And I just really want to say thank you.
there's another one over here too.
So what I didn't hear is addressing those concerns. that people have raised in communities. Absolutely, social studies is key to a democracy. And yes, yes, we did have reading wars, and whole language has been replaced again by phonics. And creative spelling is no longer a thing. There are times when education makes a mistake, and there's a public outcry, and there are changes because it's recognized. I think that there's a big misnomer that people that are concerned about the new social studies standards are racist. It's quite the contrary. I know the concerns, and I haven't heard anybody express addressing what those concerns are. Again, the concerns that I've heard are contrary to the fact that people are racist. They're concerned that you are going to actually cause, you're going to cause exactly what you're trying to stop. And so I would just say that there needs to be a listening to what the concerns are and an addressing of that, because again, it's actually, rather than people being racist, they're very concerned about racism.
So, listening to what everybody else said, Paula, I agree with what you're saying, Westerly, South Kingstown. What I think many people in the room are thinking is all of this is great, we need it, we need to move forward. But what I'm envisioning is, you know, what we've been going through at our meetings for 2.5 years, wasting time talking about absolute nonsense, having 40 people come to the podium berating us. Yes, we can tell them that this isn't our choice, right? The curriculum will be our choice, but we can choose one of them or whatever. But that's what's spinning through my head, is more wasted time, which is wasted resources, and you get to the end of the meeting and you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, what did I do to help these kids today in this meeting? Nothing. That's all. Thank you.
I just wanted to make one more quick comment and commentary. Thank you for saying we have to have those hard conversations. I acknowledge the stress of being a teacher on the front lines. In Bristol Warren, we had that happen during the pandemic. We had a teacher at our high school who was targeted and then trolled and had all of her public information displayed all over the internet. It was awful, and she was scared. And we could have done a better job as a district and as a school committee supporting her, and I wish we had. But just because these are hard things doesn't mean we need to be afraid of them. That's why we're all here, right? Was to come and show up and make changes. So I'd like to challenge all of us that are interested in this room as a public body to have these discussions about what is civics, what are we willing to do as a group, how can we support our superintendents, how can we support Rhode, how can we support each other, teachers, students, to do a better job to advocate for this, because this is as close to the whole picture as we've ever had the nerve to get. And I think that's beautiful. And I commend Rhode. I commend all of us for starting this conversation, but I think we need to work at having a bigger one and a broader one and trying to finish it.
As far as the social studies standards, you know, this isn't a Pontius Pilate, what is truth question, right? History happens. And it's a duty to teach our kids what happens. You know, with Rhode Island history, I mean, I went to school in the 70s and the 80s, right? We had no history taught about the Narragansett Indians in the state of Rhode Island. The history needs to be taught. So that may upset some people, but that doesn't mean we don't teach it. There's plenty of things. History happens, Holocaust happens, genocide happens. Report the facts, as Senator DePalma said earlier, the facts. And as long as written in that curriculum isn't an opinion of what happened, curriculum's going to be just fine. You will never control somebody going off the deep end because there's a particular part of the curriculum that they don't like, right? I'm from Warwick. Gratefully, we haven't had those issues or those wars yet. If they come, I'll welcome them. That's fine, because the facts and the truth will always win. It may get ugly and it may be tough, but we have to do this. We cannot kowtow to a very loud minority. If any of us have raised kids, you know, when your kids are wrong, they'll just yell louder to convince you that they're right. So we have to stand firm. And Diane, what you guys go through in Westerly and other towns, I mean, I have nothing but sympathy for you, but it's a battle we have to participate in. We don't have a choice.
So I've got two kind of specific questions. First, is there any place in the standards that talks about specific skills that kids are going to have in dealing? There's an awful lot about content and a lot about what we want them to be able to identify or understand. But is there any place where it talks about how they're going to show that understanding, what they're going to be able to do with that information, those kinds of skills? That's my first question.
So yes, and so part of the actual table actually speaks to what we want them to demonstrate, but just in terms of like specific skills. So there are, like, just as an example, like in the geography thinking, specific map skills that kids will learn. And part of that table over here is the demonstration side. It's what will they be able to do and what students will demonstrate the ability to. So yes, and this is obviously one example. So this is around culture in the communities, like analyze similarities and differences between cultures in their communities. One that speaks to the Narragansett Indians, actually, identify local indigenous communities, and it lists out several of the communities within Rhode Island.
Okay. And then my second question has to do with the incorporation of ELA standards. You were talking about co-teaching and that sort of thing. I taught ELA, 7th grade ELA, in Massachusetts for 14 years. And one of the things that happened following Common Core is that the social studies teachers actually took on a lot of the responsibility for the nonfiction standards that were going on. So they actively were teaching research reports and how to, cull information from texts and that kind of thing as part of reading across the curriculum. And I'm wondering if these standards are going to go in that direction at all or support that.
So even the Common Core in general supports that. I would say these standards support that as well. And that happens now, I would say, to various levels in different districts and different schools. But we certainly do encourage that to happen. The more the kids are applying those skills in the context of social studies curriculum and science curriculum, because reading those texts and your skills and how you approach those texts is very different than reading a novel. So certainly that is the expectation that across the curriculum, we're always working on those reading skills in different ways.
Will that be part of this document?
The frameworks, yes, do get to that incorporation of ELA. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi there. Quick question regarding the K through 8 grade progression chart. I noticed that grade 1 starts with local communities, and then grade 2 jumps to learning about global communities. Then it looks like 3 through 5 is more back to regional learning. How was that factored in for grade 2? I think that's great to learn about global communities, but at grade 2, is that absorption of that information really going to remain, valid until it gets into the higher grade points?
Yeah, and I have to tell you, we struggled with that, the progressions in general, and whether to stay state and then go global and then back to U.S. and it's been all over. But yes, I do think kids, and I know they do, internalize some of that knowledge, because part of it is not just saying I'm going to pick a random country or a random, schools and communities and classrooms have that ability to think about what the global community looks like and how they want to look at that in various ways. So it could be that part of what a school and a community wants to do is think about who is in their community, what are the cultures in their community, and explore the world through those. So I think you can make those connections to kids to where they stick with them.
So I am not a teacher, but I do have a granddaughter in the 1st grade. So based on your information, she will not learn about local, she will not learn about global communities, she will not learn about working together in regions. And hopefully, if the framework comes in on time, she will start with living and working together in Rhode Island. So you have a group of students who are not going to have the knowledge that you want them to have upon graduation. How do you plan on compensating for that?
The one thought, I know I can see Phyllis looking for it, because both of us maybe had the same thought even, but one thing I will say is, in many cases, some of these topics are actually already being taught. So it's not that these progressions represent brand new progressions across these grades and that what's happening in your schools right now has nothing to do with this. Because particularly in the elementary grades, they may not be in this order. They may not, right now maybe they're doing global communities in grade 3 and it's in a different spot in one district versus another. But many of these are already part of the scope and sequence, the curriculum and the materials that are being used in your school systems. So one, that may not necessarily be the case, that they just won't have exposure to some of these topics because these are new, because, as I said, in many cases, some of this is already happening. 2, we know that that's a challenge, is because part of implementing any new set of standards is trying to look at what's the timeline for that implementation, what do we already teach where, and how do we, as we reorder things, start to phase that in. And then it's possible if a school system's looking at this and they identify like a major missing piece, that may be where they want to add in some temporarily supplemental material as they're phasing in to try to, even that out. But it's always a challenge as we make, major shifts in content. And
Yeah, just similarly, so I know in particular, the kindergarten, most curriculum, when you look at the purchased curriculum, in kindergarten, you do start with yourself, the community around you, families, that is pretty traditional in starting from the small in your family to getting out to the larger community. So in that way, that part probably is not very different from what you're doing. But I think that also can go to, as your district is examining where you are now and the alignment and the shifts, is where do I then start? Is that a priority for me? So one of the things when we transitioned to the Common Core, look at that, I'm going right back to where I was many years ago. We did actually prioritize and work with districts to say, start with K, 1, 2. Start here and start to add on grades as we transition. So your kids, as they come up, are having those foundational skills. Because what would happen if you started to try and implement grade 5 without having had the background? Kids were going to be lost. So we did make that decision to do that. And so because our communities are in different places in what they're doing for social studies right now, that may impact the way districts want to roll out and start aligning their curriculum.
I'm looking at the history of Rhode Island, and I kind of introduced Rhode Island into my teaching. I was a social studies teacher in 5th grade in Boroughville, and I'm wondering if you're going to do geography with that, because I met someone who comes from Newport, and he asked me where I was from, and he said, "Where's that?" So, living in Boroughville, we don't hear too much of that word anywhere else, even on TV.
Yeah. Well, no, when you live on the island, sometimes you don't venture off the island
New
very
York,
often.
yeah. And the other thing is, with Rhode Island history, is it going to continue from 4th grade on? Because I don't know if anyone knew Al Kleiberg. He came from Ohio, and he came to Rhode Island, and he fell in love with it, and he learned all the history and more and more and more, and he actually said that Rhode Island has of every other state in the United States, Rhode Island has the most history. Is it going to be used throughout the rest of it?
So a couple things. So map skills, geography is included throughout the grades, so as well as within grade 4. So even just thinking about, it starts in kindergarten and 1st grade with starting to think about your community and your school. So yes, maps and geography will be in there. And yes, Rhode Island history, you will see it across, especially because we do have that rich history. So when you're talking about the American Revolution and World War I, and all of those things, what is Rhode Island's role in those? It's going to come up throughout the various topics. So yes, you will see Rhode Island history. Certainly in U.S. government it will come up, but it will come up several times throughout all of the coursework.
Well, I want to thank Lisa, Phyllis, Nicole, and Lisa.
And I was going to do the same. Thank you all. Thank you to my team. But especially thank you to all of you. This was a great conversation. We will certainly take back and continue to support schools and districts as they're implementing this. But just a lot of great, thoughtful conversation here. So I'm hopeful for a more united and a more positive Rhode Island and a future for our kids if we can really support each other in really kind of recognizing, we are more alike than different, and so really trying to, continue to spread that message. So thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Actually, I'll be here for a little while, but my team will be leaving.